Good evening. It is October 30th. We have another Wednesday edition of the Cheap Seats with Pat and Kevin. As always, I'm Pat Holland, and I'm joined by my good friend, Mr. Kevin Callahan. Kevin Callahan,
Good
how are you?
evening. Excellent, Pat. How are you?
Good, good. So we're gonna try to get through this with no IT issues and no internet issues, but we'll see how that goes.
We'll see.
And I thought, so we're doing
That would be a
something a little
first.
bit different tonight. So Netflix came out with their documentary maybe 2 weeks ago, maybe I think. Um,
I think it was the 23rd, so just about a week
yeah,
ago.
um, called The Comeback, the 2004 Boston Red Sox. Um, I I watched it relatively quick, and as I normally do, I usually watch it late and then fall asleep, and so I had to kind of watch it back a little bit. And um, but it's a great documentary. Obviously the greatest comeback in professional sports history, right? It is
Unless the Yankees can
with
do to the Dodgers what the
right.
Sox did to the
Well, it's
Yankees.
when you get yourself in a position where that's the only thing you have to do is, you're in a tough situation. But currently, to date, it is the only time a professional sports team has ever come back to from down 3 games to zero.
In
In
baseball.
baseball. Yes. And just the way it transpired, I think is just the greatest comeback. And
Absolutely.
having it be against the biggest rivalry, and we can get into some of the other stuff later because everyone just forgets that. Not only did they came back from down 3-0. Everyone forgets that that wasn't the World Series, right? Then you're going to go on and they end
No,
up sweeping the Cardinals, and it's very it wasn't really. Um, I guess the
it was
World
a sweep.
Series wasn't as you know, dramatic
Dramatic.
as the American League Championship Series. So
Well, it's the baseball equivalent of USA beating Russia.
yeah, yeah.
That did not give them the gold medal. They needed to beat Finland
Right.
2 days
Oh, right,
later.
right, right. Yeah, well, exactly. And everyone, I guarantee you, most people that you ask have no idea that
Right.
that wasn't the world medal game. That wasn't the gold medal game.
Yeah.
But
Gold medal
uh,
game. Right.
so it's a 3-part series. Part 1 essentially starts out just going over a little bit of the history of the rivalry, right? Um, basically the curse of the Bambino is the biggest thing, right? But so
Right.
the Red Sox win 5 of the first 50 World Series ever to be played. And the Yankees
15, right? 5 out of
5
15,
out
yeah.
of I thought they said 50.
I think it was 15 though,
Okay.
because it started in '03 and it went to 18, and the Sox have won 5 of
All right. So
those.
5 of the first 15, which obviously is
Yeah,
more dominant than 5 of 50, but the dominant part is that the Yankees hadn't won any of them.
correct.
And so they win the Red Sox win in 1918, and then in
Yep,
1919 they turn around and they essentially sell off Babe Ruth
right, at the end of the 19
for
season. Yep,
cents on the dollar, essentially, right?
yep,
Um, and again, at this time, at the time that we're talking about the late early 2000s, right? The rivalry is the rivalry, but it's more of a Red Sox rivalry than the Yankees fans really could give two shits about Red Sox
yeah,
outside of just hating Boston fans in general. But to them,
right,
it's like you haven't done anything. We can get
right,
into the arguments all
exactly.
the time about, I always say, I don't really care what happened prior to your lifetime. What have they done in your lifetime? And like I
Right.
said, I said to my friends currently, it's unbelievable because the New York Yankees, my son has not been alive for a New York Yankees World Series. The last time
Them winning it, he wasn't. They won in
he was born
'09.
in 2010.
Ah,
So
okay,
he has
yeah.
not, like,
So
I mean, obviously, he obviously knows who the Yankees are, but to him, it's not
right.
the however many 20 something, was it 26 that
Well,
they've won?
in yeah, and both of my boys hadn't seen a Celtics
Right.
championship in their lifetime until 2000 and was it 8
Yes,
that they
but
had finally got
but
off the
but
schneid.
Kevin, since we're Boston fans, let's not talk
Yeah.
about this because the same applies to us when we talk about the
I know.
Celtics. It's like, well, I wasn't born in the '60s, so those don't count.
Right.
So exactly,
Yeah,
but I
exactly.
was born in, was it 80, 86?
86, 84, and 81.
So those 3, but I remember
They won
80, I mean, I
championships.
remember 86. Obviously, I was
Yep.
much younger. 81 and 84, I was young. I don't recall those, but I remember I did go to City Hall Plaza in '86 with
Okay.
my
See, they
brother.
won in like the Celtics won 74 and 76 where I was alive. I was 4 and 6 years old, but I
You
don't
don't
remember
remember,
either
right?
one. However, I do remember the names of like JoJo White and Dave
Yeah,
Cowens.
and I remember, I mean, I know the
Um,
names just from,
but I had older brothers.
right. Well,
Right.
right. And, but anyway, so I don't talk about that because it defeats my argument purpose because it's the same thing, right? So,
I love
um,
it.
uh, so anyway, so they give you the kind of the overview of that, right? And in
Yep.
that same time frame, the Red Sox, they lost 4 times. They've lost in the World Series in game sevens:
Yes.
46, 67, 75, 86.
Correct.
All in game sevens. And I think in this documentary, which is pretty cool because there's a lot of like interviews and a lot of like fan stuff going on, and they have the one guy who's basically like you know really Boston accent, and he's like
Yeah,
I
that
don't
guy.
even want to talk about it. And then he talks, obviously, in 1978, they have the one game playoff against the Yankees to
Yeah.
go to to go to the playoffs, right? Was that to go?
That was my first
They
Red
tied.
that's my first Red Sox heartbreak.
Yeah, they tied. Were they tied at the end of the season? So they had a one game playoff.
Yeah, they were both tied. They were both tied with 99 wins, and 63 losses. The Yankees picked up that 100th win in that game. Jim Rice played all 163 games that
Yep,
year because it was officially counted as a regular season game.
right.
It did not count as a playoff
And
game.
then obviously we know that that was the Bucky fucking Dent game where he
Yeah.
basically breaks our heart. And
Uh-huh.
so essentially that's the opening, the opening, whatever, 10, 15, 20 minutes of it. And then they start getting into the, a little bit more detail into the 86 where they have some interviews with Clemens, which was pretty good. Like, and I remember 86, but I don't remember in detail. Like Clemens says, I mean, he was dominant. He pitched great in that game 6.
Yeah.
They're up, Red Sox lead 3-2. He comes out of the game. He's in the locker room and he literally says, the World Series, I'd never seen it, but it was in the locker room and the champagne was on ice. He's like, so
Yep.
I'm thinking, we got this,
We got
and
it.
they're up by 2 runs in the bottom of the 10th. And I think they
Yep.
bring in Mike Stanley, right?
No, Calvin Schiraldi was the pitcher.
Who gave up all the hits.
Yeah, in the 10th inning, it was Calvin Schiraldi. I can double
No, I
check
think it was
that,
Mike
but
Stanley because Mike Stanley had the wild pitch for the winning run to come in.
oh, you mean Bob Stanley? Bob
Yeah,
Stanley.
I did this before. Oh no, somebody else just did this. It was on one of the other talking heads where they were talking about this, and somebody said Mike Stanley. So Felger looked up Mike Stanley, and he's like, "Huh? What? Bob Stanley?"
Mike Stanley was a utility player for the Indians.
Yes,
I mean, for the
but he
Yankees.
was on. I think he was on
And
the. I think he was on the Red Sox for like a quick cup of tea, something like that.
oh,
But
okay,
we are talking about the reliever, Bob Stanley.
yeah,
And I even wrote Mike Stanley down. Jesus. So Bob Stanley gives out. I think there were a couple. He might have came in because I think Schiraldi might have been in there, and then Bob Stanley came in, gave up a couple hits.
Schiraldi got the
Yeah.
loss.
So the runs, I think the
Uh,
runs that scored were against him, but Bob Stanley came in. He gave up. He actually gave up the tying run was a wild pitch to the backstop, and
yep,
then he gave up
still blame
the
Kevin.
dribbler up the first baseline, which we all know is the Billy Buckner play, threw his legs out into right field, and Ray Knight scores the winning run. Now, again, it's game 6. They still have a game 7 back at home in Fenway, and I believe Bruce Hurst pitched. Game 7,
I think so.
and they obviously they
I think
they lose
so.
they
Yeah.
lose the game. Um, so that was obviously, yeah, that was probably my first real heartbreak, right? Um,
Don't forget too, they were winning Game
they
7.
were. Yep, they were.
They're up 2-0. Evans hit a home run, if I remember correctly.
Yep, yep. So
Oh,
then they go into, more current time. So 2001,
3-0.
essentially, and I want to say, I know the team president was John Harrington, but I don't was he no the Yankees did the Yankees still own the team?
Yawkey sold it to it was like a Yawkey Foundation led by like after Jean Yawkey had
It's like a
died, she was the widow of Tom
yeah,
Yawkey. And yeah, John Harrington was like the CEO of the Yawkey
right.
Foundation, I believe. And then they sold it to the group
The f-
that's been in charge
right.
since
So
the
John, yeah.
Warner
So
and
the
John Henry,
which end up
Larry,
the
you know,
Fenway Sports Group. I don't think they were called that at the time, but
they were
right, it was
not. They were
essentially
just
John
the three
Henry.
owners.
Now the interesting
Right.
thing is, as they start to interview John Henry and what he starts to talk about, I start thinking about current day,
Yeah.
and I'm like, wow, have times changed?
Yep.
So, and we can get into that later, but so essentially they sell in 2001, um, and they start to kind of, you know, renovate Fenway and all. None of this stuff is shown in the thing, but we know after 2001 they start to renovate Fenway. They do the wall over with the seats.
I was gonna say one of the cool things you could see in part one of the for sure the Netflix series. They kept showing Nomar with that picture, and you look behind him in the green monster with no seats
Right.
over it. So that must have been 2000, two thousand
Yep.
one, like you said, that they put the seats up
Yeah, they
over the
started
monster.
doing upgrades at each year, different things. I think the
Yeah.
monster was the first thing that they did. Um, but anyway, that's not part of the story. But um, so they also in 2000, so 2002, at the end of 2002, going into 2003, they decide they need to make some changes. Right? They reach out
Yep.
to Billy Bean, who at the time, and everyone's probably seen the Moneyball game. I mean, that's um, basically he is I guess he would be the pioneer of the analytical side of baseball, right? And that's what that whole movie's about. How
Right.
they just kind of, on a shoestring budget, piece together this team based on solely on analytics. Huge OBP guy, and so, and I think they cover a little bit in that movie and book. They cover that he does. I think the last piece of it is he comes out to Fenway, he's interviewing with them, and then ultimately, so he comes out, he meets with them. This is great, and he even says in this, they interview him, and he says like, Theo Epstein had been there as the assistant GM, and he's kind of like an analytics guy, so it was great. And then he basically says, then I think about like, whoa, wait a minute, like I have a young daughter. She's in a different time zone. How's that going to work? So ultimately, he made the
Right.
decision not to take the job because of his kind of family
Family. Yeah.
status, and I think him and his wife were divorced, so it was like one of them things. So, but he
Yeah. So stay
suggested,
3,000 miles away.
but he did suggest, listen, you have the guy you need already there, and that's when they
Yep.
turned over and they basically handed the keys to Theo Epstein,
To
who was
Theo.
at the time he was 28. Um, and his interviews are great. Like he's
They are.
emotional. I mean, he's basically like, I'm 28 years old. I've never ran any business. I never even sold
Right.
lemonade at a lemonade stand. Nothing. Like
Yeah.
I've never done anything. And we were just talking about how, further down the line, they start talking about like he's legitimately like living in an apartment with his college roommates. Like,
Yep.
and he's like, it's like, I'm like, and I'm talking to my wife, and she's probably not listening to me, but I was talking to her at the time. And I'm like, you imagine that being the general manager of probably the second biggest Major League Baseball franchise there is. You're 28 and you're going home from the office every day to your, like, apartment that you lived in college with your buddies that still live with you,
Right.
and they're still drinking beers
Trying to
and
figure
crack
things out.
watching games and, so it was
Yeah.
pretty cool. So they start going through, and I don't necessarily remember, like, where episode
The
1 ended and where did they get into the
the
'03?
the I think a little bit, but there was a funny line though in the first one when they said they were popping champagne with Billy Bean, and then he turned it down, and they gave it over to Theo, and like, were you popping champagne with Theo Epstein?
No,
No, no, we weren't.
no. Um,
No
yeah,
popping
it
champagne.
is,
So, yeah, so I think the first one ended around the time, because they were finishing up. I think they got into the 03 season, um, and then part two got into the cowboy up stuff. I think I'm trying to remember now.
yeah, yeah, so
Um,
they start getting into the '03, they start interviewing some of the players like Pedro and Veritek and, as
y-
much as those guys like Jason, I mean, these interviews are all pretty good because,
yeah,
they get into
yeah.
some
Mike
stuff.
Timlin had some good quotes in there as
And
well,
and
and it was
and some of the behind the scene, like the video stuff that the players were taking that they had access to was great.
right.
Um, so they start getting into the '03 season and they get into the playoffs, right? Um,
Yeah,
they're in New York, and I forgot this, like how dominant Tim Wakefield was in that series,
yeah.
like lights out. Um,
He was poised to be the MVP
yeah,
of the ALCS.
and so I think that year they brought in Billy Miller, right? Was that '03? Billy Miller,
Yeah,
Todd
and
Walker. They signed was Big Poppy was there in '03? Think they brought
Poppy came in 03.
yeah,
Yeah, but he wasn't playing regularly.
right. So that's a story in of itself, right?
I think.
Yeah, he
I'll look that
wasn't.
up
So
really
that
quick.
was the um,
Because they had Jeremy Giambi,
Giambi they
but
brought
I
in.
just want to make sure I got the year right. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm kinda looking at
I
it
know.
now.
Geez.
So basically,
Yeah.
Poppy, I think him and Pedro shared a agent, and so Pedro's telling and Poppy's telling the story about, he basically was at home in the DR. He was at a restaurant. Pedro happened to be there with the agent, and they started talking. And he basically tells Pedro that he got released. Like the Twins just kind of,
Yeah, and Pat, it was 03. He joined Boston in 03, where he played in 128 games.
yeah,
And the year before in Minnesota, he played in 125 games. He hit 272 in Minnesota with a 339 on base. I don't know why they released him.
right.
He had 20 home runs,
Well,
75
he got hurt.
RBIs.
I
Oh, did
think he
he?
had no,
Hamstring?
no, it was like a wrist injury. So
Oh,
I think when
okay.
he came back, he wasn't as productive, and they just, basically waived him.
Gave up on him. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Pedro got him signed.
that's what. So it's funny because Pedro says, "You what? They released you? I'm gonna get you on Boston right now." And then
Right.
they switched to, like, Theo, and he's like, "Well, that's not really how it happened, but yeah, we did end up signing him." But, Pedro wasn't really, I'm sure there's a mix of both. I'm sure Pedro had some sort of something to do with it. They signed him to a 1 year,
But an interesting
1.25 million.
interesting tidbit though that I never knew about is him going to the front office that said basically
I mean,
play me or trade me,
yeah, that was that
or
same
release me,
year.
whatever. Yes, I did not know that,
But,
he was stuck behind Jeremy Giambi and was it Kevin Millar at the time as well,
no,
in
because I don't.
03. Yeah, because of Cowboy Up. Millar was on that team as well, so he was third string first baseman, and took him a while to get into the role of DH.
Yeah, and they brought a bunch of, yeah, and that's what they said. Oh, and I didn't. The other good tidbit was, the whole Kevin Millar thing.
Yeah,
So he's on the Florida Marlins at the time, right? Florida.
yeah,
They
yep,
basically, like, give up on him and sell him, or
right.
they're in the process of selling him to a team in Japan.
Japan.
And, basically, that was the first time Theo basically said, "Screw it, like, I'm gonna put the big boy," because the unwritten rule was
Yeah.
you never got in between deals going on with Japan. Just let the teams
Yeah,
go.
once an MLB player went to Japan, another MLB team did not step in to re-sign that player, and Theo said, "We want him anyway. We don't care." So he upset not only Japan but a lot of Major League Baseball
Right.
teams too, including the Marlins.
Right. Because I'm sure they were getting paid.
Right. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Um,
And for a small market team like the Marlins at the time, Japan was probably willing to give them X amount of millions of dollars, and that they were just going to put in their
and it was funny.
pockets.
I mean, Millar's great through the whole thing. I mean, obviously
Yeah.
he's a personality anyway, but he was great because he's like, me and my wife go out and we got, I think it was like their names or her name tattooed in Japanese.
Oh yeah, in
And then he
Japanese.
turns around and finds out that the Red Sox just picked me up. He's like, jump in my truck and I drive to, Fort Myers or wherever they were from his
Yeah.
house in Texas. And here we go.
Here we
And,
go.
basically he's like, I don't know how this is all gonna play out. We got like 6 first basemen right now. And they,
Yeah.
you know, uh, and he had a great bat. He was he's known for being able to hit the fastball and, um,
Right.
obviously an integral part of those 2 teams for sure. Probably more than
Right.
and as you watch this, you'll figure out like he was even more involved than you even think because he can't shut his mouth.
Can't shut
Right.
up.
So,
Exactly.
um,
Sometimes to his discredit
oh
with the
yeah.
Nomar
Well,
stuff coming
right.
up later
Yeah.
on, and
And that was great too. And so they get into the whole '03 series, which, obviously it comes down to game 7 again in New York. I just for somehow I have it playing, but I just skipped to part 2 by accident. Um,
that's all right.
Pedro is on the mound. I think they're winning, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Grady Little left them in too
And
long.
Theo basically they're talking to Theo and he's like, and they show it. The analytics is his Pedro's numbers through 85 pitches. Here's Pedro's numbers after 85 pitches. And it's like
Right.
off the charts. The bat like basically the third time through the lineup, the
Yep.
hitters make the adjustment and it's astronomical difference.
Pat, really quick. Celtics were down 25. Your buddies at the game. They're in overtime, tied at
Oh, no
127.
kidding. Wow.
And your buddy and this kid are at the
Yeah.
game. That's wild. Sorry.
Oh, well, that's good. That's a good tidbit. I
Yeah.
was, they've been blowing teams out, so you expect them to come out and lay a dud at some point.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. We talked about it on our show. How are they gonna
right.
lose? Apathy, or just they could go out and beat anybody if their heart's in it.
Yeah, and at the end of
And
it always I think they gotta tighten some stuff on the defensive side of things a little bit,
yeah,
although D. White has played some great defense, but anyway,
yeah.
um,
Anyway,
so, they show that stat, which is unbelievable, and then obviously they have Grady Little, so they're talking to him too,
yeah.
and it's like, did you guys talk about, what the game plan was for when Pedro reached 85 pitches? No. No, we never had that conversation, which is like, yeah, right, you're full
Yeah,
of shit. But I didn't
right.
recall, like, just how many more pitches he threw.
That was the thing that surprised me as
Like, I
well.
remember
I thought he just went like a batter or two too long.
I
Now, he
know.
went like an inning or two too
Yeah, I mean,
long.
he ended up throwing, like, 117. I mean, he was
One-
like
yeah, it was up there.
and then it's like the trademark, like, we know and I remember I watched it at my neighbor's house at the time. Like, when Pedro's done and he points to the heaven, he's done.
Yeah,
And then they run him
he's
back out
done. That's
there.
his thing.
And I don't disagree with Pedro, like, "Hey, if you're gonna come out and ask me if I can stay in, I'm not gonna say no,
Right.
but you gotta
Absolutely.
know." I mean, he got shelled after that. They were
Right.
on him, and they had I don't even know if they had actually, I think that's when they went to the bullpen and they had Timlin and
Good
no,
looking.
Timlin was warming up, and
Oh, that's right.
who's the other guy? It was Timlin and a
I'm drawing a
lefty,
blank.
which I can't think of who it was at the time, but they were warming up. They were like both looking at each other like, "You good? Yeah, I'm good. You good? I'm good." And they're like,
Yeah,
"What's going on?" And
right.
and then then they go to, which was cool. They go to John Henry,
Alan Embry.
Embry.
Alan
That's who it was,
Embry.
Embry. Then they go to John Henry, and they basically him and Tom Warner were looking at each other like, "How soon can we fire him?" Like Grady Little. Like what?
Pat, I just looked it up. Pedro threw 123
Yeah,
pitches.
unbelievable, like unbelievable. And then it's like, you got to feel bad. Like you feel awful. I mean, I felt awful at the time too, because in all these guys, I mean, the behind the scenes stuff
Right.
in the locker room after that game was
Oh, it's
heart
heartbreaking.
like tear jerking, especially now with obviously Wakefield passing away and all
Right.
that. But it's like those guys were like right up in his locker. It's good. You're good. It's
Yeah.
not. That's not on you. Hey, but he took
Well,
that to heart, like and I
well, he thought he was going to be the new. They didn't say it in the series, but I remember this back at the time, or in an interview years later. He thought he was going to be regarded as Bill Buckner,
right,
and he did not want that stigma. And I don't think anybody. Matter of fact, I do think Buckner got too much heat because the game was tied when he made the error, and
and
they
they
had a
had game
game seven.
7. Yep,
I also think people realized with Wakefield. Um, I didn't know he was possibly going to be the MVP of the LCS, but everybody knew how dominant he
yeah.
was, and here we are in the was the 11th
Get
inning, 12th inning, whatever inning it
2 wins in
was.
that series
Exactly.
and dominant.
Without him, they're not in Game
Yeah,
Seven, and then he comes in the bullpen. So I don't know if it was that year, but at least even up to then in his career, he had been a starter in contention for the Cy Young. He had been a reliever, like a closer. He'd been a middle relief guy, a spot start guy when he was a middle relief guy. I mean, he fulfilled every single role with the Red Sox. Um, so he had nothing but respect, not only from his teammates, which was obvious, but the fans as well. So he never wore that mantra of blowing that series. Because if
and
anything, he almost won them that
and it is
series.
funny too because they had there's one of the reporters in there talking about he's like, "The weird thing about '03, same thing with '04 as we talk about it, with the Red Sox winning is the Yankees didn't win the World Series. They went out and they lost
No,
to
no,
the
I
Marlins."
I forgot about
Right? I
that. I
did
just
too.
assumed the Yankees
'Cause
won the World
just
Series. I
because of
didn't
the way
even
we
think
talk
about
about
it. They
it,
didn't
and then
win.
it's like, oh, and that's what he
Right.
said. He's like, "That's the weird part is they didn't even win the World Series." So,
Right.
but that's how invested that rivalry is. I mean, ultimately,
Right.
they are the 2 best teams typically, for the most part,
Typically.
during that time frame in the league,
Right.
but they just happen to play in the same
Yes.
division, so they can't meet each other in the World Series. Um, but so they go out I think part 2 starts out with the World Series, and basically Theo says we need to fix our pitching, we need to fix our bullpen, we need to fire the coach, obviously. Um,
There was no love lost between management and Grady Little,
oh
though.
no.
Like
Yeah, and
that
even
was
just his interview,
evident.
it's like, "Yeah, I'm done." And it was it. All right, like,
Yeah.
"Well, I think we got all we needed out of you anyway." So, and
Yeah. Can we
he
fire
kinda
him now? That was a
yeah,
hilarious
and
line. Can we fire
he
him
kind of
now?
faded off into the sunset. I mean, he was, like, nowhere to be
Yeah.
found. I mean, I'm surprised that he
No.
even would do this. And it is
The
interesting
fact
because
that Netflix got him, good for
they
them.
show him talking with, Rudy Giuliani at the beginning of
Yes.
episode 2 where
Ju
Rudy Giuliani's like, "Hey, it's not on you. What I wouldn't have done anything differently, blah, blah, blah." And he's like, "Oh, thank you. I appreciate that." I'm like, "What?" Like, everyone
that was
everyone
weird.
I guarantee you, every Yankees fan out there was probably going, "Why is Pedro back in this game? What are they doing? Oh my god."
I and I do remember watching it saying, all right, bring him back out. Oh, okay, but one
Right.
batter, get him out. One batter, get him out." And it just snowballed from there. And then the shift clearly went to Grady Little at that point because you knew he'd been in there, you knew he was getting tired, you knew you had a bullpen that was ready. Um, Timlin was a gamer. I would have been happy to bring in. I wasn't the biggest Embry fan, but I was a Mike Timlin fan. I would have liked to see him come in when he was ready.
Yeah, right?
And
Yeah.
um,
So
it's
tough.
especially like you said after he did the point to the stars and everything,
Oh 03
like
is
he was done.
over 3 oh 03 is tough. They get
Yeah,
into obviously they finalize that season, and then they basically say, now the rivalry is, like, dialed up, because then it
yep,
turns into, like, nobody else is really doing much in baseball, but the Red Sox and the Yankees are trying to match each other move for move, right? New York goes out,
right.
and they bring in Sheffield, right? Um, the Red Sox go out,
Sox grab Schilling.
they bring in Schilling, which is another great story, and I kinda recall that because I only recall it because I remember it dropping over Thanksgiving. I remember it being around Thanksgiving and having to come down. And
Yeah,
here's, like, another, like, Curt Schilling basically going like, "I don't wanna go to the Red Sox. I wanna go to the
you know the
Yankees.
Yankees will
I wanna win a World Series. I wanna go to the Yankees." And then he's like, "Hmm," you know? So him, and I forget who the assistant GM was.
Was it Ben Charrington?
I don't think it was Ben
Jed
Cherington. It
Hoyer?
was, maybe Hoyer.
Jed Hoyer?
Yeah, and
Hoyer?
he's in this a lot, I think. But they basically fly, oh, actually, I think Theo reaches out to Schilling and says, "Why don't you come out to Boston?" And Schilling basically says, "No, why don't you come out to Arizona?" So
Right.
they fly
Okay.
out there. Basically, they meet with him, they talk about it, and I think, they kinda
Hi.
convince Schilling, like, what would it be like to win in Boston, right? The
Quick
Yankees
update. Tie game. Dodgers just tied it.
very good. I'm telling you, it's over tonight. It's over tonight. I have
It might be
my
now.
my, my buddy out
Both.
behind me is a diehard Yankees fan. I was giving him a hard time, the last couple nights, but obviously last
Nice.
night they ended up coming back because I was
Right.
texting him like, "Who is this Freddie Freeman guy?" And why do they keep pitching to him? Like, that type of stuff, and then they went up, and I
Hey, he's a
stopped,
former MVP.
and actually, I was coming home tonight, I ran into his wife at the grocery store, and she was coming out, I was like, "Oh, what are you getting, you getting stuff for the Dodger celebration tonight?" And she was like, "Rah," but just lightheartedness, um,
Yep. Good natured fun.
always. Where were I? So, yeah, I mean, so
They were out
yeah,
again picking up
yeah,
Schilling in
and then
Arizona.
it's like, "Well, what are you doing? What are you guys doing for Thanksgiving?" "Oh, we'll just probably go back to the hotel, grab some Boston chicken, whatever." "No, no, you're coming back here." And that's when I wanna say it's Hoyer, says, "I had the worst food poisoning ever, and it was from the Schilling Thanksgiving dinner."
Yeah.
But which is good. It's a good take. Um,
Yeah. Very funny.
but
But they got
they get him. Um, I keep, like, I don't know what I'm doing here, but I keep getting out of the current episodes and going into the furthest ones out. But so 2004, who else did they get? They get oh, well, then that's the whole A-Rod thing too, right?
Well, yeah, they almost had almost like they had Billy Bean. They were that close to having A Rod.
Right. Another, and I
You
remember
know,
how
it's
that was all going down because it was out there that they were meeting with him,
right.
and I think, and they show it on here. ESPN basically says, it's a matter of time. It's imminent. It's coming out. Um,
Yep.
and even that was a kind of great because Theo's like, we go out to New York. It's late. We'll say, "Hey, we'll meet tomorrow," and he says, "No, no, no, no. Come up to my hotel." And they go up there, and it's like late, late, late at night, and he's opens the door, and he's in like a three-piece suit, and Theo's like, half the stuff he said to us is probably bullshit, but so wasn't half the stuff we said to him, and uh,
Right,
but
right.
he legitimately wanted to come to Boston.
Right.
But the complexity of the contract, because he was the highest paid player in Major League Baseball at the time.
Yeah, he was
which
at the 10-year 250.
which is great because it's you think about that now because I remember back then it's like, oh my god, like who's paying these guys this much money? Now it's like that's tiddlywinks. He was
Right,
making like 32 million, wasn't it? Like 32 a year,
right.
and now it's like,
It's
yeah.
crazy.
So anyway, um, so they basically like we gotta. Well, I think they had basically a trade in place because they were gonna have to make a trade, and it was um Manny Ramirez and
Hmm. John
John
Lester.
Lester for him, and they would have
Right,
to renegotiate his contract, which is where the issue kind of came up because they had to get this all. It had to go through MLB and the MLB Players Association, all that stuff, and basically they came back and shut it down, which is why it died.
right.
In the meantime,
Yeah.
what happens is Kevin Millar is on ESPN, right? And they start asking him questions about it, like, "Oh, we're saying it's imminent," and they basically asked him, like, who would you rather play for? And he's thinking, like, well, who would you rather play with? Was the question, and he
Yeah.
basically was like, well, in my mind, I'm thinking this is a done deal. Yeah, I'd rather play with A Rod.
A-Rod. Yeah.
Then the deal falls through. Now it's like, oh my goodness, Nomar's all pissed off because they were going to have to trade Nomar too. So they were
Right.
trading
He
Manny
was
and
part of it.
Lester to Texas, but they had a deal in place to send Nomar to the White Sox
To, to the White Sox, yeah.
for um I
I
forget who the
forget
player
who.
was, like Ordonez and someone else, which actually,
Maglio
yeah,
Domas?
I forget, but it
Oh,
wasn't a
okay.
bad deal. Um, and I was like, wow, that would have been pretty cool too. And that and they also now I think they signed Keith Folk as a free agent that year, right?
They got Folk as a free agent that year, but that was his first year with the
Right.
Sox.
Um,
Before.
he basically had been out in Anaheim, not Anaheim, Oakland, and he's
Oakland.
like, I had never basically tasted victory at all at any,
Yeah.
um, so yeah, some of the, I mean, basically, you got to watch this. The interviews alone, like Gary Sheffield's great on it. Um,
He's Joe Torre's good
Joe
in it.
Torre. Now, a lot of the stuff around the Yankees. So the Yankees, and I read an article where they declined to be involved in this. So a lot of the stuff that they
Right.
do have for the Yankees is basically like third party footage. So it's like interviews that maybe
Yeah.
were done on ESPN or through some other networks. Um, and
And one-sided. And one-sided towards the Red Sox, as you would expect with the title of the series
right.
anyway. But there's definitely one-sided towards the Sox. Just because, yeah, they couldn't, Jeter and A-Rod didn't do any interviews with it. No Posada. None of those guys were
No,
part
just
of it.
X. Well, yeah, none of the, well, Posada, I think is still connected to them somehow.
Yeah,
But like, obviously Sheffield's not. Um, A Rod
right.
is
Even Torre's not
Torres not, but yeah, and he's he's
MLB.
some MLB type thing. Um,
Right.
you know, you think back and just think about like had things worked out, right? And in fact, A Rod came here and all these other deals went through, like how that would have all played out.
Yeah.
Would they have gone on? Would they have been as good as they were? Would they
Right.
have gone on a run and won multiple World Series in a like um,
Yeah.
uh, you know, so it was the December of 2003 that the A Rod, yeah. So November 2003 they signed Schilling, and then in December is when all the stuff with A Rod went down. Um,
Right.
but there were a lot of moving parts to that. Um,
Yes.
in I think moving Manny, like I don't think, and I don't recall this Manny being as I guess disenfranchised as he was, at least, or how he comes across in this. Um, but things did kind of spark, like that whole like Manny disappeared and was like late for a game and ended up being in the lobby of the New York Yankees hotel having, with, um,
Yeah, with their shorts backup
yeah, who
shortstop,
he's
right?
friends with.
Yeah,
And I do Enrique Wilson, that's who it was.
that's
I
it.
do remember
Yeah,
that once they said it, I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I remember that being kind of a big thing," and he was like,
yeah.
um, and then I
No, he
remember.
was a he was, I wouldn't say it was trouble, but it was like, but they alluded to it a little bit when Francona took over for the team, and he's like, "Don't try to be my friend." He said to Francona,
Yeah,
and
and
I think that
I
was
mean, you
part
have to
two.
remember he's an odd guy anyway. I remember reading an
Right,
article, I wanna say it was, um, Callahan, um, who used to what's his name? Who wrote for the Herald?
Jerry.
Jerry Callahan?
Yeah, Jerry
I
Callahan.
think he wrote an
Yeah,
article where he, like, spent some time with Manny down at spring training once and was, like, driving around with him, and, like, Manny mentioned something about, "Oh, grab something out of my glove compartment," and there were all these, like, game checks in there that he hadn't, like, cashed, and it was like, "What's that?" He's like, so he was just, like, just so aloof, you know?
right.
Not as bad as, like, I guess not as bad as, like, the Ricky Henderson stories that you hear about how he, you know, talks about himself in the third party or doesn't remember people that he played for, like, the
Right.
whole, or that I know he had, like, a game check, I think it might have been his first bonus check that he didn't cash, he framed it, and finally, like, I think the A's reached out and they were like, "Hey, like, we're trying to, like, reconcile our books and there's this check out." He's like, "Oh, that's framed in my office." And they were like, "What? Can you cash it for us, man?
Can
Come
you
on."
deposit it? Can you
Yeah,
cash
but that same
it?
thing with Manny, and it was just like, whatever. It's like, "Oh, it's in the," so you have these, like,
Yeah,
game checks, which are probably thousands of dollars, this his paychecks just sitting in his
right.
glove compartment in his car.
Yep.
So I guess that was kinda Manny. Um, so that whole season, 2004 ends up being, we made some changes, we added some players, but we still just didn't have it, right? We weren't there. We struggled
Right.
defensively. Nomar was unhappy. Um,
Very.
there was a whole, like, and I don't remember this, but yeah, I guess he came out of training camp or spring training injured,
Yeah.
right? Supposedly he got hit by a batted ball and hurt his Achilles, but no one actually saw it, so he wasn't playing. And they were like, no one really knew if he was hurt or not, but he wasn't playing.
Or was it his feelings?
Yeah,
Or his
he
feelings
had hurt
hurt?
feelings. Now, I remember, my next door neighbor had a relationship with Ortiz, and he worked at his batting facility in Stoughton, the Hit
Okay.
Dog, I think it was called. And something happened that Nomar was somewhat involved there, but not. And I think Ortiz's partner at the time, or some sort of partner, left and ended up opening a facility with Nomar. Um, and so there was a rift between Nomar and Ortiz, and
Oh,
I only know that, like, third hand through this guy because he had a
right.
relationship with Ortiz, and I don't have all the details, but um, that started that whole season. So, but he didn't play a lot, and then there were games that he just didn't even make himself available. And I think they get into it a little bit where it's like
Well,
there's the Yankees game. I think it was a regular
famous
season
game.
game, but Jeter makes that crazy
Yeah.
catch where he dives into the stands and cuts himself open, and then they need a hit there. It's like, hey, we need a pinch hitter, and Nomar's like, I'm not going in, or reluctantly went
Right.
put himself in or something like
Oh,
that.
then
So
he did say, I guess he made himself available later on that game
right,
after he asked out of the game because he was sick or whatever.
right.
And then and they immediately cut to Nomar right after Jeter dove into the crowd. Like Fox is like calling him out,
Yeah,
Fox
because at
TV,
the
because that was the game
time,
of the week.
those were the 2 guys, right?
Right.
Did they get drafted the same year?
Especially with A-Rod on the Yankees at that
Yeah,
point.
did they get
It was
drafted the
always
same
like,
year? Was
yeah,
it Nomar in or came up the same year?
Yeah, it's like Nomar came up with like, shoot, was it 96, 97, something like that. And Jeter was around the same time, and A-Rod was around the same time, and Omar Vizquel was also around the same time, but he was a couple years older with Cleveland.
Yeah. But there was always that
So
comparison between Nomar and Jeter. Who was better?
right.
Who was a better defensive shortstop, whatever. But it was
Yeah.
very clear that Nomar was struggling that year, whether it be because of his feelings or he was just, I mean, he also had issues with the creatine and all that stuff
Right.
that was coming out, whereas he had tendon issues, right? His tendons were breaking down and all
Yeah.
everything that was linked to supposedly using this creatine.
Right.
So, you know,
Creatine. Creatine.
yeah, oh, yeah, exactly. I mean, I mean, they had the I wanna say I have a picture somewhere. We did a tour of Fenway, and I wanna say it's in the left field walkway before you get out to where um, the seats are above the wall. They had pictures of, like,
Yeah.
anyone who's been on like, Sports Illustrated, and they have that picture of Nomar when he has the bat, and he's just
Oh,
ripped,
yeah.
right? And it's like,
All jacked. Yeah.
yeah, that's not from working out every day, I'll tell you.
So you had Nomar that year having that issue with Ortiz, and Ortiz was obviously becoming a star. You had the issue with Nomar and Millar going back to
Oh, yeah.
spring training, and Millar, even by obviously the Netflix series is slanted one way or the other, but by all accounts in the Netflix series, Millar was a very popular teammate.
Yeah,
Nomar was a better player, but Millar
sure.
was a very popular teammate, and Nomar comes off as not a very popular teammate.
I In '04 for
So
sure. Yeah, for
yeah,
sure, listen, I get it. I guess I'd probably feel the same way if and I think he was asked that at spring training, like, "Yeah, I mean, how would you feel if"
right,
you basically find
yeah,
out from, like,
through the
basically through the
media,
media that, they're looking to
yeah,
move you or whatever the case may be.
right,
Um, that's what he says, that, basically they're looking to find someone else to fill your position. How would you take it? But
right,
by all accounts, he was a great Red Sox. It's unfortunate the way his career here ended. And,
right.
by all accounts, he said he wanted to finish his career in Boston. Um, but, you know,
I don't think they win though if he stays
no,
in
no,
in
for sure
Boston. They
not.
picked up
Yeah, I mean, they picked up,
Orlando Cabrera
Cabrera
and
and
Doug
Doug
Mankiewicz.
Mankiewicz, who essentially I mean, they were definitely upgrades from the
Right, especially at
defensive
short.
standpoint. And Doug
Right,
Mankiewicz had a little bit of pop, but I mean, they weren't bringing him in for that. They were bringing him in to shore up the defense. Um,
short first base because Ortiz was a DH. Millar was the first baseman who was better than Ortiz, but he wasn't a Gold Glove first baseman. Minkiewicz was a Gold Glove type first baseman. So no, it was a good trade. Uh, Obviously, and the team played better. Without Nomar, obviously they took off down the stretch. They were like
yep.
45
So
and
yeah, so
15 or 40 and 15 down the
they were
stretch.
going to trade. Nomar was going to go to the White Sox, and they had this already. It was in principle, right? He was going
Right.
to go to the White Sox for Maglio Ordonez, who obviously probably would have been early in his career then, right? I would
Yeah.
imagine. And Brandon McCarthy were the two players they had lined up. Now, it'd be
Yep.
interesting to see it. Like I told, we always talk, about going down the rabbit hole, right? So that's one of those things. Like, well, let's
Yeah.
go back and look. How did those guys end up? But Gene, they had to get it signed off on, and obviously it didn't happen. So, but ESPN did announce like it could happen in the next 20. And that's when Theo says.
Well, I lost you,
And then
Pat.
the next thing I know, frickin' Kevin Millar's on ESPN running his mouth. He's back.
Pat, I lost you for a second. Did I lose
I
you?
don't
Or
know.
did you
Your
lose
screen
me?
went black for a second.
And your screen went black on my end, so I'll blame me.
That's fine. No biggie. So Kevin
I'm back
Millar
now.
basically, that's when Theo says, and then all of a sudden Kevin Millar's shows up on ESPN and he's running his freaking mouth. He's like, hey, I just answered the question. Dan Patrick said, hey, who do you think? Um, the question was, who do you think's going to throw you the baseball across from the infield? That was the question. And he goes, I was like, well, I
Yeah.
mean, it's a done deal. I'll take A-Rod. Get in my. He goes, I immediately get in my car and my phone's ringing and Nomar calls me. And he basically
Oops.
up and down him. How the F can you say
Yeah.
that? What are you effing doing? Blah, blah, blah. And he's like, well, there you go. He's like, I pull over and I'm yelling back at him. It's great. Kevin Millar he makes this because he's just a personality.
He was a character with the Red Sox. He went to the Orioles. He was a character with them. He was a great fit for MLB
Well,
Network. He brings life. He brings his opinion. He's
yeah,
knowledgeable
yeah.
of the game.
It is good because
He's a great interview.
they say Dan Patrick says who he says, Dan Patrick asked me who did I want to be throwing the ball across the diamond to me, and then they go, he actually asked you, he actually asked you, he's like, dude, I just answered the question I was asked. This is to Nomar, and then he
Yeah.
says, they say, the question was, who do you want? He goes, it was who do you want? Oh wow. Well, I guess he has a right to be mad at me then. This is
20 years
20
later.
years later, right? But he did, and then no, it's funny because Theo says, he's probably the most influential player we had in that clubhouse.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're not even to the point where they hired Francona yet, right? So they hire Francona, who he
That's a good question. I'm not sure when they actually hired him. They just said they hired him, but I don't know when
it
they
was like
hired
right
him.
before spring training. I think they brought him in.
Let's see. I know that's Red Sox. Hired
Players Union
Francona.
rejects deal. Now I'm in a commercial.
I can't find it. October 4th. No, that's this year. That
That was that's his
was this year.
newest signing.
uh,
But Francona is great too. Um,
he's really good.
yeah, I mean they he's a kind of a players coach for sure. And
Right.
again, another dot that gets connected. I forget that he was with Philly when Schilling was there, so there got to be something to that.
Right.
Like, hey, let's go out. We'll get Francona. He knows Kurt. He's an analytical guy too. Um, you know, but that season didn't play out the way they thought it was going to. Right? They weren't great.
Right.
They struggled most of the year until they caught fire. Right? And I think it was after the All-Star break. Ortiz
Right.
turns it on and just starts hitting the lights out of the
And
ball.
it was after the fight.
So
It
they
wasn't
so they
even
hired Francona in
the fight.
January of 04, I believe.
Okay.
I could be wrong. No, that's the whole A. Oh no, that's when the
January.
Yankees signed A-Rod. So ultimately, January of 04. So December they have this deal done. It's basically in place, waiting for the MLB to
Yeah.
approve it. It gets rejected. He turns around. And that was the other piece. Aaron Boone basically blows his knee out playing basketball. So he's out for the season. And so they had no choice. They needed a third baseman. So that's when they reached out. They
Oh,
reached out
right.
to A-Rod because they needed and had the conversation about him moving to third. And I'm sure it wasn't as easy as they come off as it being, but
Right.
I'm sure he was like, well,
And I just found it was December 4th, 03, is when Terry Francona signed with the
okay,
Sox.
so yeah,
So right after
right after.
Schilling,
So it
so they
makes
went
sense. They
Schilling.
signed Schilling. They signed
Schilling recommended Francona.
Francona, and then
Right.
they go after A-Rod. That falls apart. I'm sure they didn't think they were going to get the backlash with the Nomar. Manny was always kind of a
Right.
question mark anyway.
Because they tried to keep the whole A-Rod thing under wraps,
right.
and
Obviously
and
that.
the stuff
Oh
leaked out,
well,
and that's when
and that's
Millar.
the other thing they pointed out. It not only did Millar leak it, but so did the owner of Texas. When
Owner
they
of
had the
Texas, who is
conversation,
Dan
because he was
Hicks,
like, "Hey,
yeah.
we're going to try to move this contract." Yeah, well, we're interested. Let's talk. There's some work that needs to be done because this and that and the other thing. Okay, great. And then he comes out and says the Red Sox are meeting with, so I think it was already out there. I think that
Right.
the Millar issue was more of, you ran your mouth, and now we gotta triage. We have no
Now we have
Mars.
another issue.
Just yeah, it's not going to work. He's not going to be happy. He's not going to want to come
Right.
back. Um, so, but
Right.
they they go into obviously A Rod comes. The Yankees, get a lot better. They go to spring training. Yeah, you get the Nomar, you get the Manny. Hey, um,
Yeah.
don't try to be friends with me. Like basically,
Yeah.
Manny. I guess he asked. Did he ask for a trade in the offseason? I believe he did, but there was a lot.
I think he
Yeah, I think there
did.
was a lot going on. Nomar obviously was a big story there. They fired Grady. Francona is now the manager. Um, Francona's
And
a
just a
good.
lot of uncertainty.
He's a good take too. Big
Yeah, he is.
and he obviously, he was good for the team for a few years, for
He
many years
was.
actually. I mean, he was,
Yeah.
I think
I
I think
I didn't want him to be fired or let
I mean,
go.
even
I was
to the
happy
point
with
where I mean,
Francona.
there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that talking about him at college parties up at BC in the dorms and with his
Yeah.
shirt off and so so that was tough for them to come out of spring training. But Nomar obviously comes out not playing. He's injured. Whatever's going on. Um,
And it just seemed like as the year went on too, not only were they not winning, I didn't know they got off to such a I won't say bad because they were around 500, but
right.
bad compared to how they were the year before. How quickly they were falling behind the Yankees. I think what they say, 10 and a half, 11 games behind the Yankees. I didn't realize that they were just sputtering along at 500. I did hear recently that after the big fight, that didn't necessarily, yes, that was the spark that they needed, but they also didn't play
It,
well right away after that either.
correct. The other piece that
And I think it was the trade,
yeah, the
right?
trade
It was the
really
Nomar
yeah, I
trade
mean,
that sparked
so
them.
that they had defense they were struggling defensively still. So when
Right.
they made that trade, they got significantly better on the defensive end. The other thing that they point out
Right.
is the fact that they rejected or I don't know if they rejected it, but Pedro, it was in a contract year. And they basically
That's
said we're
right.
not going to give you what you want. So Pedro was a
Yeah.
little pissed off. Now it's,
Right.
well, who's the number one? Well, I'm a number one. Schilling's the number one. Who's going to go?
Schilling's the number
So there was that,
one.
and they kind of play it off a little bit like, oh, I didn't really care. But, they're both type A personalities. You know,
Right. They both want
who's
the ball.
starting opening day? And I think Pedro got the start on opening day. But you forget that Schilling evidently was pretty hurt most of the season with
Schilling
yeah,
was?
so that
Oh, with that
that
tendon
tendon
issue.
was an issue all season. It didn't really come to the forefront or rear its head until the playoffs. And it's
Right.
pretty cool because he tells a story about like, hey, what did I learn from watching Pedro, right? I go down and watch his bulletin session, and he's the one that I saw. He would stand on the rubber like half on, half off, and use that as leverage. So then I started doing it, and I noticed that got an uptick in my velocity, and I went with it.
Yeah.
His issue was
Gave him some pop on his
his
fastball.
tendon was popping every time. There was a lot of friction there.
Well,
So
yeah.
he played, I guess, most
Right.
of the season with like a bone bruise because of it. And then ultimately, what ended up happening was the tendon ended up, or the tendon snapped, or the ligaments that hold the tendon in place snapped. so that it was
Right.
just loose. So,
Right.
um,
Exactly.
I guess
Yeah, look it up though. I mean, Schilling did play in 32 games that year. He got most of his starts in.
yeah, he did pitch. I don't think he pitched as well as he did the previous year.
Right.
But as he says, and he even says it in this documentary, is come the playoffs, like this is why they brought me here. They brought me
I
here.
mean, it's funny though. In '04, which was weird, he did go 21-6 with a 3.26 ERA. He threw 226 innings. The next year, he only threw
Yeah,
93 innings. Then in '06, he threw 204 innings again. So, so he did all of that with a bad tendon before the play. I mean, he had one of his he had one of his best years.
with the Red Sox,
um, his best year was in '01 with Arizona, where he went 22-6
right? Cy Young. Did he win the Cy
with a
Young that year?
2.98 ERA.
Or
That was his best.
did he
But
win the Cy Young that year?
he may
Or was
have.
it Randy Johnson?
I'm not sure. Maybe
Because
Randy
they pitched on
Johnson
the
that year.
same team, right?
Yeah, yeah, they beat the Yankees in the World Series in '01. So
Yeah,
pretty good
you know,
starting
you
point in
have
one
to.
day there too.
The good thing about this is like we can give overviews of this all night, but you have to watch it.
Yeah,
The interviews are great because
right.
there's stuff that that whole like Pedro supposedly leaving the locker room after his first start, which is
Yeah,
against the team rules, but then he says it never happened. I was in here, and it's like, well, I didn't leave. I was in
he was in a different
I was in
room.
the
Yeah,
family room. I didn't leave.
right.
That's pretty great. Um,
Yeah,
but they got off to a slow start. But yeah, but Schilling talks about that whole leverage thing, and it was like if I picked up anything from Pedro, it was that, and I was able to up my velocity. But he's like, when I rotated my ankle on the rubber, there's a lot of compression on my bone, which ended up. He's
right.
like, so I had a bone bruise most of the season, which I was able to play through. But as long as my velocity was up, I was willing to take that as a trade off, right?
Yeah,
So, um,
it was good to see Schilling come off in a positive light because there really hasn't been a lot of positives about Schilling in the last 15 years.
no, and yeah, I mean, and part of that is his whole
And
political
rightfully so. Some of the
take, his
political
whole
stuff,
what happened in Rhode Island or whatever, and I blame Rhode Island for that
and then the
for the most part.
outing Wakefield when before Wakefield outed himself on being sick.
Yeah,
So Schilling comes off actually pretty good in this documentary. So that was good to see because they just focused on him pitching with the Red Sox, which as a baseball fan, Red Sox fan, that's what I care about.
yep. They just couldn't win. They were in June. They were 3.5 back in June.
Yeah,
By June, and then they just kept losing. So I think by the All Star break, they were like 8.5. Or let's see, by June 12th, they were 6.5. By July 1st, they were 7.5 back. Yankees continue to win. They were just defensive issues. And for what I remember, Derek Lowe sucked that year, and he pretty much says it in this. Like,
by his own account, he
I
sucks
sucked.
as well.
Um, and it is pretty cool once they get into the playoffs. It's pretty cool because they talk about and he's like, I went out, whatever it was. It was game 6? Oh
Low,
no,
yeah,
or
where he
was
got
it
the start, and
game 5? It must have been game 5. They were down 3-0,
that
and he was on the mound.
yes,
Um,
I'm looking up his stats, and
and he basically is like,
is
I'm
that
walking out to the bullpen, taking it all in, going, this could be the last time I ever pitch.
because he was a free agent too?
Yeah, he was a free agent. Um, and it's funny. I mean, obviously they don't. I mean, they emphasize um, how bad Nomar was defensively, and We lost Kevin. We'll see if he comes back on, which is pretty good. But in July, I want to say it was July, they dropped a game to the Yankees 4-2. Nomar didn't play or made some errors, and then basically he was essentially a cancer in the locker room. So by July 1st, it was a gut check game, right? They play the Yankees again, and in Yankee Stadium, and this is a game, right? He's not going to play. Don't know if I'm available. He's not in there, and then this is a game that Derek Jeter makes the running, and he's back. So July 1st,
It wouldn't be a
it wouldn't be a podcast if Kevin
podcast,
didn't.
Pat.
Yeah, July 1st was a game in New York that I believe it's a game that Nomar wasn't available. Jeter makes this
The great catch.
yeah. Oh, yeah, and this is good too, because this is where Sheffield Pedro's pitching. Sheffield says he's like, I didn't like Pedro at the time. And he's like, Bernie Williams told me if you want to piss Pedro off, step out of the box while he's in his windup.
Yes.
So he steps out, calls timeout, and he goes, but he didn't tell me what was going to happen, but I knew. And he goes, Pedro says, yeah, he throws it at his head, or he throws it inside and hits him. It's like, well, and that,
Yep.
You've lost that side of the game a little. I mean, we've talked about it, about pitching in general. Like you've lost those like ace pitchers that you knew when they were on, they were going to go 8 or 9 innings. And, you've also
Yep.
lost that pitcher who had no fear. Hey, you want to stand?
No fear going up
You
and
want to
in
stand?
over your
You want to
head.
stand that close to the plate? All right, here you go. The
Fine.
Clemens, the Pedro, those guys. So it was pretty good.
Yeah.
So this is like, I think where that rivalry, if you will, starts to heat up in 04 is this game, July 1st.
Yeah.
But and I think this is a game, right? Manny hit a bomb. But I think this is a game that Gina makes that crazy catch. And, that's when they basically put the camera on Nomar. Yeah, there it is. Yep.
Right. Yeah, that was crazy. Good stats, fun stuff.
Yeah, and they show Nomar. Basically, the whole Red Sox team's on the top of the dugout steps, hanging over, and Nomar sitting out back. So they got swept by the Yankees in that series. They dropped to 8.5 games back. They lose to the Braves. They just continue to lose. So then that's when Theo really starts to go, we got to really think about trading Nomar away. So
Yeah.
Anyway,
and then things really take off.
Things take off, right? They get better. The big, you get the fight, which was probably in September of that year, which
late August or early
I
September, I
think it was
think.
September. And actually, it was a game that again, another thing that I didn't know about. It was a game that was supposed to be rained out. Right? They meet on the field, talk about it, and say,
Yeah.
"No, we're not playing."
I didn't know this.
They go into the locker room, and basically, the team says, "No, we're playing today." And I think it was Veritek said, "No, we're playing." So they have to turn around and change it. And I think that's when Torrey's like, I don't know what was going on, but that's the game they played. And so, which really turned the season around. That fight sparked it. They didn't play great after that, but then they did start playing well. And then we know how it pretty much ends, right? We can touch upon this. I mean, this is long, so we got through basically 2 episodes. Maybe we can wrap up episode 3 next week and get into the actual World Series.
That'd be cool.
Or
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
American League again, World Series, American League Championship
Yeah.
Series, which was unbelievable. So,
Right.
um,
Yeah, July 24th was the fight. Then they struggled, and then boom, they took off mid August? Because I want to say from the documentary they went 40-15 in their last 55. Is that right? Or 45-15?
sounds about right.
Something in 15. Yeah, that's so. So they played 100 games of and I'm making this up, 50-50 ball, and then they took off down the stretch like 45-15.
Yeah.
I want to say they finished with like 95 wins and something like that. It's still behind the Yankees, but they closed it within 3.5 games of the Yankees. Yankees got first place, but Sox got the wild card.
Yep. And they beat
So
and I think it was Anaheim or California Angels maybe at the time,
California,
but to and then
right?
go to New York. So we'll pick up next week and we'll do a deep dive into
Yeah,
that series and the World Series and then just everything after the fact in
right.
Boston and whatnot. So um,
That'd be cool.
we will we'll sign off on that since we're about an hour and 12 minutes in, and
Sounds good.
we'll see you all next week.
Tune in Saturday
Oh
morning.
yeah, Saturday morning at 9
Right.
a.m. WOON,
Yeah, join us in the cheap seats.
12:40 a.m. 99.5 FM.
Yep,
OneSoccerRadio.com.
soccerradio.com.
All right, have a good night.
Have a great night. Thank you.